What led you to become an artist?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Right away, when I was about 3 years old, I had an uncle Arthur who was an artist. He lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and in an artist colony. And I only met him once, but the time I did meet him, he seemed to be remarkably sane. And he made quite an impression on me. And he also, my father at the time had a bar in the playroom that he painted a mural on, and that was very impressive. Like, he just kind of came up with this. And then also in grade 1, I went to a Catholic school. In grade 1, the teacher, the first few days, just drew, if I remember it correctly, drew a picture of hell on the blackboard in colored chalks. And that was terrifying, basically. And that stayed there all year long. It was apparent, this is what happened to you if you didn't do what you were. And it was very, very powerful. Plus, we got holy cards all the time, which had all this kind of Catholic imagery, this very, bleeding hearts and all this. And I would think that, and also I remember being at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts with my aunt, who used to take me to shows there, and waiting to get into Tutankhamun in '64. And there was a painting of a mural painting of a ladder reaching to the moon, or sort of, and I just remember thinking about that, and it sort of like, that seemed really interesting to me. Like, you can do that with an image or a painting. Anyway, I guess things like that.
So, painting. So painting would have been one of the routes towards the work that we see now.
Yeah, I did make sculpture for a while, actually. Construction, in art school I painted, but painting at a certain point became really daunting. There were just too many options. Like, you had a blank canvas, and what could you do with it? And I started at that point working with found objects, and I found the limitation to be really helpful to me to be able to make something. Like, if you had 3 objects, there were certain ways of putting them together, and that I worked in that for a while and actually showed some. And actually, when I moved to Toronto, I talked to Carmen Lamanna at one point. It's quite a bit at the time, and he was. I couldn't. He said he was interested, and we were supposed to make some kind of a studio visit. And but then I went through a period where I just couldn't do them anymore, and I started drawing in notebooks wherever I was. And it was sort of a way also to sort of contact Toronto, because I was so alienated when I went there. I didn't have any work, and I didn't know anybody, and I was felt like I was completely out of, and it was a very difficult period, actually. But the notebooks tended to sort of link me to the place in a way, and sort of gave me some way to deal with it. And basically all my work that I've done since comes out of that, and sort of, so it's this kind of contact with places and space, and occasionally people too. I haven't painted portraits for a long time, but
portraits. When we talk about portraits, we all know what art can do. It can paint a portrait. It can offer a resemblance that makes people feel that they're larger than just themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But art does a number of things, and I'm just kind of curious, since you painted portraits for a while and then moved on, what it is, more generally speaking, that you feel painting or art itself can do.
Yeah, I was afraid you were going to ask that question. Hopefully can remove some of the filters we have and come closer to an experience of where we are right now. To me, that's really important. And so that basically, I guess, would be the answer to that for me. But I'm sure for somebody else they would have a completely different, or maybe not. I don't know.
You know we edit,
Yeah, okay.
so don't worry, don't be.
So I can sort of make side comments.
Absolutely,
yeah.
whatever. Mhm.
How come then, moving from that to maybe another version of the question, which is every practice has some kind of centrality to it, some kind of trajectory that is consistent. I guess every artist hopes to have a consistent sense of trajectory in their evolving practice. I'm kind of curious how you see the core interests that circulate within the work over the years.
Well, going back to the notebooks, it was sort of a way of, and to me it sort of saved my life. It was like a way of, at the time I was not in a great, it was a very difficult period for me, and I think it sort of was something that it really helped me to negotiate a very sort of difficult time, and I think it sort of gave me my direction too, because I've used that basically in my work since. So the work and the paintings come out of a personal point of view, which is very subjective, but it's a point of view that I feel that I can talk about that and sort of move through that, and that has to do with also moving through space and moving through life and all kinds of things, and it connects everything, from that point on. So the work evolves in a pretty organic way. One thing sort of leads to the next as if that makes sense.
Of course it does. But here we are in a particular body of work, Michael, and I want to come to that work through the title of the series, which is Paintings About Art.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that series?
Yeah, I do. It's I've always been interested in art. It really fascinates me, and I remember I just gave a talk the other day about going to the National Gallery in it must have been 76 or 75, and seeing Donald Judd's plywood boxes and being really kind of, I didn't know what to make out of it, and having been also involved with carpentry, they didn't even seem that well made. And so there was this kind of real, like, what am I looking at? And it took me a long time to sort of, that stuck in my mind. And anyway, then at a certain point, I worked also as an art technician, and would install art, or worked as an art mover also. So you'd go to somebody's house and you'd see a Picasso crying woman on the wall, or a Giacometti's, and we'd move it, so you're actually picking it up, and and then you'd see other things that were pretty the opposite. They were pretty awful, but all in the space of, and that interested me a lot. You could see something totally kitschy, and then something totally sublime, and sort of in the space of an hour, and you were sort of looking at them in a way that people don't see them in galleries too, because you're actually assembling them, or putting them somewhere, wrapping them up, or moving them somewhere, or installing them. And this transformation really interested me. Taking Dan Graham's piece at the CCA out of the crate, and just these glass pieces were quite beautiful just at that point, and before they were even assembled. And so it started to really interest me how context also totally affects art. And so to make images that sort of work with that. Sometimes it was ridiculous and sometimes it was incredibly beautiful, but that all of that interests me a lot. And that brings me to recent work where I was looking at I went to see the land art, or not land art sites like Smithson and Michael Heiser's Double Negative and Lightning Field, and I tried to see Rodin Crater and Marfa, Texas, and that sort of shocked me in a way that it's changed the work in a way that made me the context doesn't exist like that anymore, because the work exists in the world in a completely different way than something does in an art gallery. Or the Michael Heiser at the Dia of the Beacon, I don't think compares anyway to what you can see in the desert. Like in photographs, it looks like not very impressive. But being there was an incredibly moving experience, and I think it's so tied into everything about just even finding the thing in the desert. And I did the trip alone too, which I think was really beneficial to actually experiencing the work. And the work then is really an experience, like in a way that a painting I've been having a hard time wrapping my head around how to include that, or how to go, and it's for the last 4 years I've been sort of working on it. It's changed the work in a way that I find really interesting, but I'm still like struggling with. There's a lot of questions that come out of it.
What that leads me to think about is the difference between the sublime and the beautiful, if I can coin a couple of phrases from Art Talk. And your description of going to those places suggests to me the power of the sublime, which is perhaps incredibly difficult to engineer in the white box in the gallery, where the beautiful can perhaps be attained, but perhaps not the sublime, unless, as I see in the work that you're in the series that we're discussing here, Paintings About Art, unless you see it in context, unless you see those works, beautiful or not, in context, because in some respects the context that you were describing in the desert can be understood in a very different way perhaps, in stepping into the gallery and thinking about the space of the gallery along with the works. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because the work in the desert, or there's no frame, so that the experience is not. There's no point where you enter it. You've entered it as soon as you've gone to see it before, from the hotel or from the plane trip, or I don't know. I find it hard to explain, but there's no. Like art, the work exists in the world in a different way, and I find this really interesting. It really it's given me so much to think about as a painter too, because it's anyway. This has been something I had a show of 4 years of work, and I'm happy with the way it came out last spring. But it's really feels much more like trying to feel my way through the dark and try to work with questions I can't really answer very easily. And like I've seen, there's just something about, and then it also ties much more into a much more subjective idea about art, which interests me a lot now. Like I'm less interested in the photographic relation of painting and art, which was a big question with a lot of paintings, and I'm much more interested in actually trying to paint from life. Like there I was like the group of 7, sort of trying to go through and do little panels at each place and try to experience it maybe in that way. This goes back to actually trying to, the notebooks or things like that, and trying to experience it the way I can relate as a painter, basically.
It occurs to me that the power of the notebook, and I think the power of these paintings, like the one that you're in front of right now, lies in the sense of an apprehension that something's about to happen. Could also say an apprehension of will it work, these kinds of questions. And so there's a kind of, I wouldn't say anxiety, but a kind of it's a negotiation that one feels has to take place with you.
Yes, well, that's basically, it's complicated because there's a lot of things that sort of lead up to this. I started working with ink too, which is a very fluid medium, so it's changing and you're already working outside of control, and that has led also. But the idea of trying to put down a mark and then another mark and another mark without changing them, and trying to construct something in a very, I guess it's by its nature quite delicate and tentative, is kind of what I feel with these pieces and certain ones I've been doing, and especially painting from life, because there's this aspect of interacting with a reality, like it's going to rain or it's cold or it's getting light, the light is changing, this kind of shifting reality. I find to be really an interesting thing to try to do, and try to make something in that. It sort of eliminates certain over neurotic tendencies, perhaps. Which I can fall into if I'm,
The movement, I think you described it. The movement, the sense of trajectory is interesting because these paintings are paintings before the painting exists. There's a sense that there's going to be a work, but it's not here yet. Or if this is the work, then how does it relate to the idea of painting something? It's as though one is painting something that is occurring before that something happens. Would you see the paintings as anticipating?
I'm not sure I understand the question specifically.
Let's call it anticipation. Is there a sense of the anticipatory, the sense that something's going to happen, and we as a viewer feel ourselves moving towards that, but not knowing where we're going?
Well, I really feel that, yeah, because they can. That's why I'm a little tentative about showing these at the moment, because they're in flux at the moment, but hopefully that is a big aspect of the work too. At this point, it's less fixed and more kind of. I don't mind if it contains that kind of feeling. In fact, because this is what I feel a lot these days, and I kind of like it because it seems like there's something that I haven't got to. There's something. Yeah, maybe the anticipation is if that's what you mean. I'm not sure, but it's like trying to come to something, and also in a way, it's also how little can I leave parts unfinished, or like what is. And that interests me a lot, like parts of the paintings, if they're not finished, are implying something that aren't there, but it's active, like the white, the gessoed surface or whatever is still, it's real, like it's doing something, it's not empty.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, but this is something I feel I could work on for, like it's something I'm moving into at this right now, so.
You also are interested in photography, or the photographic image, and I'm curious the relationship between that body of your work and the paintings, In light of the fact that you have, I think, said at some point that the physicality, the materiality of the work, of the practice is very important for you. Do you want to pursue that at all?
Mm. Well, as far as there's a few answers there. So as far as the relationship of photography was something I find. I became well here at a certain point when I moved to Montreal, I was really at a crisis in my work. The work I'd been doing in Toronto, I just couldn't continue it. I'd worked 3 years on a painting and I started hating painting, and I just kind of went, I don't know why I'm doing this, and it was just, I was blocked. I just couldn't. And so to bring it back to something, it just got too complicated. There was all art historical references and all this, it just got too, and I decided to work from life, which is something I've occasionally done. In Toronto, I was doing that with, I don't know if you remember Simon Harwood, and a bunch of artists that we'd get together and we'd draw each other. And I talked to, Simon Harwood was a very big advocate of painting from life, and at the time, we talked a lot about it, and I wasn't that interested. I was and wasn't interested, and I was kind of, but it started when I moved back to Montreal. I just couldn't paint the way I was painting before, and I just decided I'm just going to paint. I'm not going to use photography or any artist. I just want to paint directly from something in front of me and see what I can do with that. And I started painting in orange every day, like a gouache. I do a gouache. I did 150 over a period of time, and it was something very, very direct, and it was simple. Like I didn't have to create and from there I kept working. For 10 years I worked from life, and it became the space of my apartment on St. Urban Street. I did 26 paintings of the apartment, then I did paintings of the same apartment on spheres. So the whole room was on a sphere, and I'd stand in the middle of the room and turn and paint the whole. And for 10 years I did that, and I showed that work in '98 at Plateau Montréal at the Maison de la Culture, and somebody wrote in the book, you should get out of the house more often, which I thought was a pretty good was pretty it really hit the nail on the head, basically. And I kind of went, oh yeah, it's that obvious, so I thought, oh, it's time to start using photography again and try to expand my subject matter. And I think also reacting to a lot of 80s painting, I really wanted to get rid of all this expressionist stuff that was just, I just couldn't, and come to a much more deadpan, less kind of, and so I'm also around that time, because of that show, I met Edmund Allen, the painter. Because as an artist here too, I was also ignored for about, 5 years. I couldn't get a show or anything, and finally this came up, and you put the work up sometimes, and then you go a month later and take it back down, and that's what's happened. And anyway, I get a phone call one day, and it's Edmund Allen calls me up, and he said, I saw your show at the Maison de la Culture, and I really liked it, and I'd like to meet you. And so we met, and we became pretty good friends, and I really enjoyed talking to him. And he also was very interested in that point of where's painting and photography, and we talked a lot about that. And so that was a big question for a long time, but I don't feel I ever answered this question, but it's just something that becomes less important to me now. I like the idea of the experience, the process of making something much more fragile in a way, and because the photograph is always it's static and it doesn't move, it doesn't change, it doesn't. And I think after, I guess, seeing the earthworks, it sort of really affected me like that. There's something else going on, you know. When you see a Judd concrete, you know, cube and you know, on the ground, there's wildflowers and there's animals, there's the sky, there's the trees behind, everything becomes, and that is really something, I think. That really knocked me out, basically.
I'm thinking about your experience of the work in the desert, Donald Judd, and this is work from a very particular time that appeared, at least in retrospect, to be working around a fairly central kind of discourse. And many people have said, you know, whatever happened to that kind of deal? Do you regret that sense of everything directed towards a particular end seems to have shifted?
No, I don't. But I find it interesting. But I've been to the Dia Beacon like 3 times now, and I kind of went, okay, I've seen it now. I don't need to go back, and you know, I mean, there's great things in it, but it's kind of and it's a wonderful, but it is a period of art that I can't say that. No, I mean, certain things I understand. You know, when I see Blinky Palermo, or when I see Agnes Martin, or when I understand. But the earthworks were something that I can see Smithson in a gallery, but it really doesn't do anything for me. And Heiser too doesn't. You know, you can put a rock over a passageway, but it's not. I don't know. I didn't see it. I didn't experience it, but I don't feel it's the same thing. And part of it, but. I'm sort of a bit obsessed about this at the moment, but part of it is also just going there, the experience of being there, finding it, and not dying of thirst in the desert, you know, or getting lost somewhere, or getting is also all part of it. So there's no this I don't know. I keep coming. This is.
Do you think we should be working harder to see art? Because I'm hearing, you know, the sense of struggle might be too strong a word, but the sense of effort.
Yeah, earning it.
Earning the right to see the word.
Yeah,
that's something that should exist more.
I think so. I think if you're, I mean, I think generally most artists are pretty interesting if they've been doing it. You know, you go see a retrospective of somebody, even if somebody I've never been particularly interested in, and you go through their life's work and you kind of go, wow, it's pretty impressive. And I think if somebody has that enough to pull them, because it's so easy just to say no or do something else. I mean, basically everything is telling you to do that. It's as my teacher used to say, there's a million reasons not to do it.
Maybe we can thread through to something else, which is nature, the art system today, especially insofar it is benefited from perhaps, but also suffered from the increased technology that we have. And the ability to see things at the blink of an eye and move on. Do you feel do you feel yourself as an artist that this has shifted the way artists worked with the culture as a whole?
I don't really have any good or bad feeling about it. I think we adapt to whatever. It's like, you know, when people say, oh, well, this doesn't happen, and this, like, art exists always, maybe at more primitive levels or whatever, but I think we part of it is also adapting to whatever the reality of where we are at the time, and trying to take something up, creative out of it, basically. I think this is, that's what it is, and so I don't really feel that we've lost anything because of this, and I do enjoy being able to access images, and things when I want. Like I kind of go, oh, there's a painter, and Horace Pippin I just discovered the other day, and I can go to the computer, anytime and look at his work. I mean, it's not the same as seeing a real painting, but I get an idea about it, and I think that's pretty great. Or these videos, James Combe in New York. I don't know if you've ever. He goes around galleries with a little camera and sort of handheld, and it's all shaky, and but basically any important show over the last 10 years, he's covered it in New York, and you're able, if you can't go, watch 20 minutes, spend 20 minutes in the gallery in some way. I think that's quite wonderful in a way. And he talks about it in his way. So, but
since that opens up the vastness of the contributions that artists make in a way that was perhaps not possible before, because one only had the art magazines, perhaps.
Yeah. But at the same, well, it's different. I remember, like my education was going to bookstores. I spent so much time in bookstores, like just looking at art books and looking at any books, all books, just a lot of art books. And now that doesn't exist. So there's got to be other ways to. The internet is kind of. But I did really enjoy spending a day just going to bookstores. It just was a wonderful way to spend, and record stores. That was my. I could do that for days on end.
How would you like the public to experience the work then?
Well, I would like people to like the work or enjoy it, but it's not anything I can really control. That's a tough question, because I think basically I'm quite selfish as an artist. So I'm happy that if somebody's interested. But I know there's been times when it didn't seem like anybody was, and that's it's not great, but it's okay too. I still was making art, so I don't think it's really necessarily with the public in mind. Although I'm very happy that I can engage with somebody. It makes it a lot less lonely, basically.
Painting seems to have come back, and that may be an overstatement or a silly statement, I'm not sure, but there seems to be more appetite for painting in the last decade or so than might have been previous to that, in the era perhaps of Donald Judd and Michael Morris and such. Do you find that?
I think it's okay to paint now. I don't feel like there's been times, like the early '90s in Montreal here for me was as a painter was just horrible. But there is a benefit. Also, when I moved to Toronto, same thing. People say, "I'll go back to Montreal," or it's kind of like okay. But I wasn't painting at that particular in Montreal, but when I moved to Toronto, I was making objects, and I couldn't. But in Montreal, there was just no interest, and but it was like a 5-year period where, and I've been at this point a few times where nobody cares, so you just do exactly what you want to do. I don't have to consider anybody else, because nobody's ever going to care about it. But I want to make something, so I'll do it. And I think they've been very beneficial periods, even though they're quite painful, because for all intents and purposes, you're a failure. But it leaves you alone to do something, and I think they've been very important. The 2 periods where I experienced that were very important for me, to sort of reestablish something that they gave me space to get to something new, I think.
I know that you expressed an interest in David Milne, and would it be the case that your interest in him as an artist is not, you might say, contaminated by the sense of an oppression that can exist when art historical models have been overstated and become, you might say, iconographically commonplace? Too much art history, in other words. What is it about David Milne's work, for instance, that would...
The originality of it. I don't think there's another painter, I mean, except Peter Doig, who's sort of used a lot of Group of Seven and David Milne, but it's truly original painting, and that really interests me right now. And I think like this whole idea that everything's been done, or I really don't think it has. And I think just because our particular point in space is different than it's ever been before. And so on that level, as a painter, I always feel that if I just paint what's here that's contemporary, it's always contemporary of the time I'm in. I mean, in the future, it's going to look, but it's always possible to comment, to talk about that, I think. And Milne certainly does, in a very, very specific point of view.
Specific, and you were saying original, and I'm kind of curious about this question of the specific and the original, because in the culture that we have, it's often suggested through theory or even just through normal journalistic practice that somehow the culture has become unhinged. It's become, you might say, inauthentic. The question of the original seems to have dissipated. And I wonder, do you have that sense yourself?
No, but I think it's the same way that it's an interesting question, because what is original? Warhol was pretty original, even though he's putting a Coke bottle or whatever it is, or a Campbell soup can, or that's original, even though he's using something that exists. So the context, I think, or how it's, and I guess a lot of postmodern art is sort of appropriation, and all these things have been. So I still think it's possible. What interests me at the moment is less sort of appropriation, actually, that like trying to make a painting in as honest a way as possible. Because I think they're, well, depending on who does it, but that's always the possibility, I think, because it's such a subjective, specific. Your sensibility and everything is embodied in the painting, or comes out in the painting if it's not derivative or trying to be like something else, or trying to enthrall with something else.
Tom Thompson, for us at school, had lost its authenticity.
Yeah.
It becomes simply what you learned at school. You go back to Tom Thompson, as you were just describing it, and finding that sense of the original that seemed to have been lost in its replication over the years. Do you think that painting lends itself to that possibility?
Well, I mean, the thing about art is, and it's like seeing those Donald Judds in the National Gallery, those boxes, like, made me mad, I was kind of going like, this is crazy, this is stupid, I could do this, or, I mean, but everybody said, oh, my kid could paint, like, I think what it is going on this trip through the desert. I'd never been interested in landscape before. It didn't, what I'm live in the city. I'm not I don't go on canoe trips. I have when I was in camp, but it's not, I don't go camping, I don't do all, but driving through a landscape all of a sudden, especially the desert, where I'd seen that movie Jerry by Gus Van Sant, I don't know if you know it, but the two guys go in the desert and they wander around, they're just goofing around, the guy gets on a rock and then he falls, he hits his head, so it seems like this moment of drama, but everything's fine, and then they realize they're lost, and the whole movie basically is them just dying. It's just one long line, like until they just die in the desert because they can't find their car anymore, and it's just kind of like, this was going around. But driving in the desert, I had always a full tank of gas and 5 gallons of water, you know, and you pay attention to the landscape. All of a sudden, like, my survival is dependent on this. I didn't even have a cell phone, so it's kind of like, oh, that's all of a sudden landscape. I've never paid attention to landscape that way before, and it's sort of, oh, there's this, that sort of opens a door that I hadn't really thought about before. But so you become alert in a way, or pay attention in a way to, like, going to try to find double negative is like when I was looking for it, you're trying to find something that indents. It's not a mountain, it's not a landmark, it doesn't stick out, so you can't see it until you practically drive right into it. And so one of the ways of dealing with trying to figure it out was looking on YouTube at Michael Heiser's film and trying to memorize the mountains around, because he made a film where it's up there, and when I got on top of the mesa, I could recognize the mountains, and it sort of gave me a way. So it was I'd just never been in that particular situation, and being alone, I think also made it much more of it was a more intense experience, I think. Does that answer the question? I don't know if it sort of veered off into it. Anyway.
Well, what it suggests to me, actually, Michael, is what Roland Barthes talks about when he talks about the punctum. The punctum?
Yeah.
That moment when you see a photograph that everybody else would seem completely banal, maybe a Tom Thomson if you've seen too many prints of it.
Mm-hmm.
But because of a particular experience that you yourself have, you come to that photograph or that painting suddenly aware of what its meaning can be for you.
Yes.
That nobody else can actually experience. And you feel this is, how you might describe it.
Yeah, well, it's like you've lifted what they say, the dust from your eyes or whatever, the filters or whatever, because things get shoved down your throat, or you can't approach them on your own terms. And I think it's that, I mean, basically we're a bit perverse that way. We're not, somebody said this is really great, you might kind of go, well, I'm not sure, but maybe if you came across it in a different, you kind of go. So I think we want to sort of open those doors for ourselves in a way, or come to them on our own terms. And I think what's so interesting for me about art is that it's always different. Like culture is a really good word because it's alive, it changes, it's changing and we're changing. And our points of views and everything is shifting, and all of a sudden something I hated 5 years ago, all of a sudden I kind of go, oh, I get it now. I didn't, and so and it's continual. And that's pretty interesting, I think. I don't know, can you approach life that way? I don't know if you could, but it would be pretty great if you could, actually. But I find art has a certain, anyway, it's like a great conversation that's going,
Get lost in the desert and survive, that might be
Well, I don't mean to be dramatic, but it just had it's kind of it's kind of interesting like that. Whereas going to see the cave paintings the year after was really great too, but I wish I'd done it first before seeing the land art, because you're mediated so much. Like there's a guide with a flashlight telling you exactly where to look, but as you're walking through the caves, like the light's changing and all the forms are changing and the shadows are changing and everything just by moving through the space. You're kind of going Pablo Picasso, like it's like a film going on, and you kind of go, well, there's an image, and there's an image, and then there is an image, but it's like they're generating. But it's a much different experience because you're there with a group, a tour group, and somebody's pointing out what they want you to look at, and so you don't have it. And I think it's being able to approach art on your own terms in your own way without anybody telling you what to think about it, or to be able to receive it on a very visceral level too, because the landscape is a pretty visceral.
Artists persevere for any number of reasons, and the perseverance can be draining.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that a sense of humor or a sense of comedy can bring an artist through all that? That it helps to have a sense of humor.
It's totally necessary. Really, to be able to appreciate absurdity, I think, is pretty important. Otherwise, yeah, would be deadly. I would for me, it would be completely deadly. So, yeah.
Do you find yourself engaging in comedic acts occasionally just to carry yourself through, or is it just a general sort of sense of the comedy of life?
Well, I like laughing, so I'm happy to laugh as much as possible. So, but I think it's also necessary because, yeah, certain points seem completely. I mean, nobody asks us or artists to be an artist. It's really, and it does seem at certain points that it's rather futile. Although I have to say I've tried to stop a few times and I found that if I stop, okay, I'm not going to paint anymore. At certain points, I want to work in a more some way that I can communicate more with people. That art isn't this weird thing that people so. But I always get drawn back into it. So it's just something as somebody at one point explained to me. I said, "Oh, I'm going to quit." He said, "Good, you should quit." And I said, and what I wanted to hear was, "No, you can't." So basically, he said, "It's not a choice. You're going to quit or so just shut up and get on with it."
Do you ever find that enters into the work at all?
Well, directly, I can't really say, but I'm sure it does in a way, yeah, because I tend to like sort of things that have a little bit of black humor, maybe, or that, and certain parts of paintings about art engage with aspects that are a bit absurd or ridiculous, or I find it's always trying to see beyond our time because we're so, filled with what we're. It's one of the reasons that I like teaching in an independent school too. It's outside of the system of how to think about art because I think it's pretty narrow. I think it could be so much more open, and I think it's starting to become also, you see a lot of naive or outsider art or all this stuff is becoming a thing. I think for collectors maybe more, it's affordable still. In a, I guess, cynical way I can say that.
There's a great cartoon I saw in New Yorker many years ago, the painter looking exactly like a painter with a beret and whatnot, smock, standing beside his easel. And on the easel is a painting that looks like just a whole bunch of crap. And he's explaining to the viewer that this painting is about my fury at entering into this profession in the first place.
There was one I saw was in the New Yorker too was, I can't remember it, if I remember it properly. But it's an artist who's gone out to shovel snow in front of his house, and he's come in and he goes, I'm satisfied with it, I'll look at it tomorrow and make... It's just...
What would we do with that in the New York? Curators, Michael. What's your experience of the business of curating? Not necessarily specific curators, but just the whole curatorial establishment and how it functions. Any thoughts?
Well, gee whiz. There's bad ones and good ones. That's what I can say. Some people, I really wonder why they're involved in art at all, because they don't seem to like it at all. But other people seem to genuinely really care about it. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
A good curator likes art and a bad curator doesn't.
Well, no, not that way so much. It's just I worked I worked in many galleries with many curators, and I would say there's some people in art that don't really seem to like art or artists at all, and you kind of wonder why are you here then, because it seems to be a wonderful thing to be able to be part of, but that just.
Would you say the same about critics? Would the same sort of apply?
Well, critics, I find I don't read that much art writing anymore. I used to more. But I buy art for him almost religiously, but I hardly ever read anything in it. I like to paint pictures. Recently I've been reading Lucy Lepard, which I really enjoy. So it depends. Like there's sometimes if I think if I'm thinking a lot about something, like Lucy Lepard obviously has certain things that I'm sort of thinking a lot about right now. So and, I mean, I have to say I did enjoy reading John Bentley Mays in the 80s just because he would make me so mad. And I didn't feel like he really, was, half the time I just say, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but I read it. And it sort of created discussion and sort of I think it was very interesting. I don't think, I've experienced that since really, somebody that could. But it was also dangerous. He was too important at the time. Like if he said somebody was good, they were great, and if they were bad, then they were finished. Like I remember when Monumenta happened, I don't know if you remember that show. I was working at a job, and I get a phone call at my job. This guy calls up and he said, I really like the painting that's in Monumenta, I want to buy it. And it was a Friday. And I said, well, that's great, I was really excited. So, but I wasn't able to meet him, and he would have, we would have settled the deal Friday night, but I couldn't meet him, so I said, call me tomorrow, and that Saturday, I'd pick up the newspaper, and there's a review of Monumenta, and John Bentley Mays picks me out as one of the worst in the whole show. And that guy never called back, and that was like, just like, oh man, like, I could have gone Friday night, and I would have, anyway, but that's part of, but it is interesting if there's good criticism. Here we don't have much in Montreal anymore of any kind of writing in the papers, or, well, there is some, but it's not really, it doesn't seem really,
Do you think artists write better?
Yeah, I do. I like border crossings a lot because often it's interviews with artists. I think art is very difficult to write about. I think, especially certain kinds of art. I just think, what are you going to say about an abstract painting? Like, I mean, it's pretty difficult. But to hear the artist talk about their engagement with it, I think is pretty interesting. Or, but some artist writing is pretty deadly too. So. Statements are. I hope I'm not saying anything going to get me fired.
Well, pass it by. I love your story of the collector, your brush with the collector. What views do you have on collectors, and is there a particular kind of profile of a collector that you would respect more than another?
Well, somebody that I think it really likes art for what it is and isn't, the problem with so much art right now, I feel it's all money. Like, it's about really money. Like, you go to New York and it's money, and it's even the galleries put you off. I mean, it's just like you're stepping into money. You're stepping in, and it's kind of like, I don't know. I like to see somebody genuinely is as excited about art as I am, and not just thinking about. I mean, it's fine, an investment. I would be happy to buy something that I could sell for 5 times the price in 2 years too. But it's pretty iffy with art too. I mean, I think it's not going to really work. I don't know. But somebody that had a genuine interest, I think, I mean, the money's great. I mean, I'm very happy to be able to continue to work. So selling work I finally have a gallery that does that, is able to do that. And that changed my life, and is able to let me work full time as an artist, which is something I never expected would be possible in Canada. I teach a little bit, but I've been able to just focus on the studio for the last 10 years, basically, which has been a great, great privilege, really.